Did you recognize that voice? That was by Dee Snider, frontman of Twisted Sister and of congressional testimony fame with I Am the Hurricane, off of his new CD, For the Love of Metal. That's been out not long. Release date was July 27th. And that is on Napalm Records. I've got it right here in my fingers. You can tell that's the promo version, not the jewel case version, right? Because you can hear the cardboard. But 12 tracks, and he's kicking it on this CD. It doesn't sound cheesy. It sounds like he took some metal helping medicine. I'm just gonna say it like that. He took 5 Hour Energy. That's what he took on, because if somebody said Dee Snider has a CD out, and I've heard a lot of people, such as our own station manager, Mr. Greg Kovach, host of his own progressive rock 3-hour show on Thursdays called Portal. He was like, meh, I don't know about that Dee Snider. I'm probably not going to listen to it. But it's actually really good. It's surprisingly solid. I've said more than I need to about it. Before that was Avantasia with Devil in the Belfry off of The Scarecrow, and Dynasty with The Human Paradox off of Titanic Mass before that. I'm wrapping up Mostly Metal here on WVLP. I'm Ken the Metal Professor. The station you're listening to is WVLP 103.1 on that FM dial. Also streaming on WVLP.org. Also available on the TuneIn Radio app. I'm going to take a pause from Mostly Metal and kick off a little bit of the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program.
Your insubordination will not be tolerated.
Okay, it is the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program. Oh my goodness. Sorry. That's bad radio manners right there, to cough in your face, and I'm about to do it again. Took a drink of the soda at the wrong time and got the fizz tickling my throat, and we don't have a cough button or a quick mute button, so it's like being here in my room. You've got to listen to whatever is going on when the microphone is up. This is the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program here, and I'm calling an audible on the show because originally my guest for the evening was supposed to be Kyle Cross, who's a worker for Acme Championship Wrestling, and they put on a show last night down in Shelby, Indiana. We were going to talk about that show, his role in it, some of the events at the show. He's also performing next weekend in Griffith at the Backbreaker Wrestling show that I'll mention again later, and we were going to talk about that too. But Kyle had some auto trouble and wasn't able to get to Valpo tonight in time for the show, so we're going to reschedule, and he'll be back to talk wrestling and metal because he is a bit touring. We were going to get into that as well, but we'll have to put that off until when he can visit again. So he and I were supposed to spend the time talking about the Acme Championship Wrestling show, and I was looking forward to his insights about a lot of what went on and some of the other performers there. But he's not here, and so I will have to forge ahead, and what I'm going to do is give you a quick rundown of the results of this show from last night, and then list some shows coming up soon. Excuse me again. This is really bad. It's like, it isn't popcorn, but it's like when you're eating popcorn and you get one of those little kernels and it just sticks right there in the back of your throat, and you swallow and you cough and you swallow and you cough, and it just doesn't go away. And then eventually, maybe it's not even there anymore, but there's like this little phantom popcorn now in your throat that just tickles. And that's what's happening. And I can't say over to you, Fred, or anything like that. So we're stuck with it right now. So let me tell you about Acme Championship Wrestling and their show last night. There was an event in Shelby, Indiana, which is down about 45 minutes from here. You go down Route 2, then you go down Route 55. It's kind of west of DeMotte, south of Crown Point, sort of in that general vicinity, on the other side of 65, but not far. A tiny little town, and they had an event there called the Rust Belt Rebellion. It was an auto show, and Acme Championship Wrestling was part of that event. They were going to put on a wrestling card. So I've never been to Shelby, Indiana, and I always like, one of the reasons I like following wrestling in this area is I get to go to places I wouldn't get to otherwise, and very often have a nice relaxing drive, through back county roads in Indiana. Unlike going into Chicago for an hour, which is a complete headache, driving for an hour through the Indiana highways it can be pretty relaxing and pleasant. So I was heading for Shelby, had never been there before, didn't know what to expect. The flyer for this event and the wrestling show said, it's at the Rust Belt Rebellion, and here's the location. And it was a street address. It was just a number, North Pierce Street, Shelby, Indiana. It wasn't described as a county fairgrounds or anything like that. No, not a named municipal site. And so I was like, maybe it's just some guy's house. Ha ha ha, kidding to myself. Well, I got to Shelby and followed the signs to the event, and guess what? It was at some guy's house. But it's not exactly what it seems. So imagine this, you're in a residential area that's kind of out it's rural-ish, right? It's a full street with houses on both sides. You're getting close to town. But it's outside of town enough that there's open space. And so you park on the street and you walk on this gravel drive in between this house and the neighbor's house. And what happens is you walk past the houses, and then the gravel path opens up into this huge, partially cleared forest where there's little meadows here and there. And whoever owns this place and puts on the show has invested a lot of time and some money into building some infrastructure back there. Invested a lot of time and some money into building some infrastructure back there. So I've written a little recap of this online at metalprofessor.com, which you can go read. And I've described it as sort of like a Renaissance fair for cars, because when you go to the Renaissance fair in Wisconsin, right, you get up there and it's kind of outside of town. You're not in the middle of nowhere, but it's rural and forested. And there's a facility there which is only open for part of the year. It's dedicated to a particular event, but it's got firm structures, and it's been built exactly for that. And that's what whoever owns this property has done for this auto show or for other events like it. You get back into his property, it opens up into a couple of meadows. One of them is where the gravel road leads, and there were a lot of people with their old-timey cars pulled up, and the hoods were popped, and people were talking and looking at each other's stuff. There was a replica of an old 76 gas station. There was ticket sales, whatever the case may be. There was a small playground for kids to be on, and some of the features on this playground were built out of auto parts. I think the slide, it was a slide, but some of the trim around the slide looked like it was made from fenders of old large cars. It wasn't like dangerous. It wasn't like kids were sliding on the sharp edges, but it was just decorated with things like this. So it was actually pretty spectacular the way that what looked like just going into somebody's backyard actually opened up into this really neat area that everybody could enjoy for the auto show. And also for wrestling, because in one of the other small meadows back there was a wrestling ring and the fence around it, or the guardrail around it. And this is where Acme Championship Wrestling was going to put on their show. And so if you've listened to this show, the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program, you've heard me talk about ACW quite a bit, and you should recognize most of the names that are involved. We had a match between Excalibur and Thomas Keith. Excalibur won that one. That was the very first match. Excalibur is on several different organizations' rosters in this area, so we get to see him a lot. He's always pretty exciting. The second match was Billy the Kid versus Phantasmo. These guys had beef with each other from the ACW show at the end of May, the last one that they had put on, and so their feud carried over into this. Phantasmo, the bad guy, ended up winning this match, but it didn't clear the air. These guys hate each other so much they went at it even after the pin, and they had to get separated by security, and all sorts of silly stuff went on there. So I don't think they like each other very much, and I'm sure we'll see more matches with them. Last week's guest on this very program, Mr. Cliff Caviar, was in a match against Cujo. Cliff Caviar came out with his insurance policy, TK0, following along behind. This was for Cliff Caviar's Tough Man Championship, which if you listened last week, you got to hear him talk about that. The rules for a Tough Man match in ACW are no disqualification. Match in ACW are no disqualification. And so anything goes. The referee is pretty powerless to get involved and tell anybody not to do something. And so TK0 got to interfere on Cliff Caviar's behalf. He helped clobber Cujo, and then Cliff Caviar, having already been clobbered by Cujo, was basically unconscious, and TK0 dragged his lifeless corpse and draped him over Cujo, so the referee had no choice but to count 1, 2, 3 in favor of Cliff Caviar. So when he comes back to the studio, we'll ask him about that. We'll see if he ever plans on winning a match without the help of TK0. Who knows? That match was just getting warmed up for TK0. He stayed out there for his next match against Dakota Prodigy. Dakota Prodigy is also a friend of WVLP. In fact, he was my very first in-studio guest when I started bringing in wrestling folks to talk here on the air. So we'll have to get him back sometime soon. He took a little break from wrestling, but it seems like he EW by losing to TK0. So TK0 had a good night for himself. He not only helped Cliff Caviar win, but he also won his own match. After that, we had Crimson Dynamo, who has been here in the studio just a few weeks ago, who I mistakenly was calling the Crimson Dragon until he graciously corrected me about that. He took on Kyle Cross, and so Kyle was supposed to be here. We were going to talk about this match and everything that happened in it and around it, but we can't do that right now. But the fun part about this match was that there was a little boy in the audience who... He didn't have it at first, but I think his mom went to get it for him or pulled it out of their bags. He had a megaphone. So, most people, a lot of people in the crowds of these things are yelling at the wrestlers, and this little boy was yelling at the wrestlers through the megaphone now. And he was particularly giving the business to Kyle Cross, with calling him things like muffin top and stuff like that. So Kyle was giving him some dirty looks, and we're going to talk about this and whether Kyle was going to have any luck convincing ACW security on Facebook that they needed to step up their game and protect the wrestlers from things like kids shouting through megaphones. So this ongoing drama is available to be viewed on Facebook. The Top Guns, they made their ACW debut. I've mentioned them a couple of times. They've been at NGW, New Generation Wrestling. They've been at Backbreaker and will be again next weekend. They took on Kyle Kaler and Venom, and defeated their opponents in a pretty fun match. Dave Allen, who's been a long time since he was here, he took on Arun. Dave Allen was yelling at the crowd the whole time. He was calling an old woman grandma, but she was in good spirits about it. He was yelling at a little boy who kept getting more and more upset to the point of tears at being just so angry at Dave Allen for what he was yelling. So he was working the crowd very nicely. I mean, not nicely, not being nice to them, but nicely in the sense that he was doing what he was supposed to do, making people angry. But Arun ended up winning that match, and so that created lots of happiness on the parts of these people that Dave Allen had been yelling at. And then the main event, Rockstar Johnny Nye was defending his ACW Heavyweight Championship against Xavier Black, and Rockstar, even after taking a chair shot to the head, was able to protect his belt and win the match. So that was it. That was ACW. Their next show is going to be on September 28th, I believe, although the location and the time have not been announced. Could be DeMott Boxing Club, could be one of the local schools where they often do their shows. As soon as I know, you will know, because I will mention it here on the show. So I'm sorry Kyle couldn't be here to talk about that match and his match coming up next weekend, but we'll reschedule and get him. Apparently he and Cliff Caviar run in the same circles and cause trouble together at ACW, so maybe I can get them both in the studio at the same time and we can talk about metal and about wrestling. So if you're interested in checking out regional wrestling shows, you've got a lot of options coming up soon. If you're not interested in checking out regional wrestling shows, well, thank you for still listening to this, even though metal and wrestling have a lot of crossover. Different pieces of culture seem to kind of get people that if you like one, you kind of like the other, and metal and wrestling seem to be one of those pairings, which is a good thing. This coming weekend, Saturday, August 25th, is going to be a busy one. It's aggravatingly busy. This is one of those weekends where there are 3 different shows to pick from. You can only go to one. That happened last weekend. I went to see ACW, but also Black Label Pro was running a show in Crown Point, and it's been a while since I've gotten to go to one of those shows, and I was hoping to go to this one, but then ACW cropped up, and they're my guys. I've got to go see them when they're running, and so I took off to Shelby, Indiana. But crossing fingers, maybe there won't be a conflict with Black Label Pro next month. But Saturday, August 25th, here's what's going on. In Griffith, Indiana, at the St. Mary Catholic Church Complex, Hildebrandt Hall, Backbreaker Wrestling will put on Super Slam. This is going to start at 6 o'clock, and since that's in Griffith, that is Central Time. Kyle Cross will be appearing, the Top Guns, Kurt Joseph, Dakota Prodigy is going to be there. I'm drawing a blank on who else because I've said there's a poster for the event, but it doesn't list a whole lot of matches. But it doesn't matter because you just go and watch. Also on Saturday, August 25th, if you want to drive a little farther, you could possibly go out to Warsaw, Indiana, and see FWF's Firestorm. That's Functified Wrestling Federation. That will be at Center Lake Pavilion in Warsaw. And then also on Saturday, August 25th at 6:30 Eastern Time, NGW, New Generation Wrestling, will put on Chaos in Crawfordsville down at the National Guard Armory in Crawfordsville. Now that's a little bit more of a haul from here, but I've been there a couple of times. That's one of those places that actually let me set up shop with the mixing board and the recording equipment to get some sound from the show and then bring it back here and rebroadcast. And so they're on my list of good ones, and I'd like to go support them when I can. But again, next Saturday, the 25th, 3 shows to pick from. I'm going to end up going to Backbreaker. And so hopefully I'll see some of you folks there. And if you ever go to a show and run into me, I'm 6'4", dark hair and a beard, I'm easy to spot. Tell me that you heard about one of those things here on the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program. In weekends after next, there's still more activity. September 1st, Pro Wrestling King will be putting on a show at the Monterey Days Festival in Monterey, Indiana. Also on that day, September 1st, Global Professional Wrestling will be running over in Midlothian, Illinois. 7 o'clock Central Time. That's Global Professional Wrestling 9. Now, most of the wrestling that I cover takes place here in Northwest Indiana. I don't say much about what's going on across the state line because there's going to be so much of it. It would be information overload. So I kind of concentrate on Indiana. But GPW is now a friend of the show, with their general manager, Steve Arendt, having come and visited us a couple of weeks ago to tell us all about what happens at that promotion. And so when I can, I'll put in a good word for them, even though I'm not trying to be doing coverage of Chicago area wrestling, but I'll mention them. September 8th, ARW Pro will be putting on a show back at their home base at American Legion 100 in Lake Station, Indiana. That's following up Headlock for Hunger that took place 2 weekends ago in Portage. September 22nd, here we go, crossing my fingers, Black Label Pro will have the Darkest Timeline Championship Tournament at the Austin on September 22nd. And unless it's like ACW or one of those folks that are just my guys and I have to go see them when they run, I'm going to get back to another Black Label Pro show, and I'm going to be excited about that. Friday, September 28th, I believe, is where you can see ACW in action again. Action is still to be announced. And then looking out into October, not a whole lot known so far about then, although PWK Pro Wrestling King will be doing Halloween Mania 5 at the Bourbon Park Pavilion in Bourbon, Indiana. That's a nice, easy, relaxing drive from here. And on Friday, October 19th, Extreme Sports Entertainment and PWK together will be putting on a show called A Night of Havoc at the Lifeplex Fitness and Wellness Center in Plymouth. That's 45 minutes from here. So that's a really easy drive as well. Matt Cross from Lucha Underground, Son of Havoc, will be on that show. And so I'm pretty excited to go see that. I even have one of his t-shirts. So that's it. That's the rundown. 3 shows next weekend to pick from. And then it looks like so far, not a whole lot of conflicting shows through the month of September, other than September 1st there, at least that I know about. But you could go to a show a week, at least that I know about. But you could go to a show a weekend throughout the rest of August and also all of September. It's a good way to spend your time. And so I think that's a wrap. That's the abbreviated version of the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program. You heard all about ACW show last night. You've heard the listing of shows coming up in the next month and a half. This is definitely information overload. And so if you want to see it kind of compiled together, just head for metalprofessor.com. And on the left-hand side is a menu. One of the options is for NWIWRAP. You can hit the menu for shows in 2018, and then there's this big long list of all the stuff that I just read. In fact, I've just been reading it right off the screen. And also on that page, you can see my recaps of shows that I go to with descriptions of what happened during the matches and also a few really, really crappy pictures that I've taken during the show, so that if you haven't gone and you wanted to see what the results were, you've got a place you can go, and it's all centralized for you. You can also follow all these different organizations on Facebook too. That's where I get all my information. And that's all I'm going to say about wrestling. I'm going to shut up now. I'm Ken the Metal Professor. That was the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program, and it's several minutes before the top of the hour. I think we can get one last song in here, and how about instead of some super duper heavy metal, how about we just listen to some Rush to close out our weekend and send us off into the brutal work week, which is going to begin tomorrow morning. Particularly brutal if, like me, you're involved with the university because classes start on Tuesday. And so, a song about headlights. You're being caught in the headlights of the oncoming traffic like classes starting. Here's Rush off Grace Under Pressure. The song is called Between the Wheels. And come on back next week for more Mostly Metal and Northwest